All right, we're slowing down. We can get stuff started here. Hello, everybody. My name is Emily Buchanan. I'm an executive vice president at Lippy Taylor, and I also oversee the Midwest office for the agency. Why we're here today, I think there's a lot of interest that we're hearing. It's actually the second time we're presenting our research and key learnings about the topic of Facebook and advertisers boycotting Facebook as an advertising platform. As we know, in July, more than 500 of them boycotted it. And we really wanted to know as an agency what consumers and media were thinking about, those brands that boycotted and those that didn't. So we conducted some research and to understand really consumer trust in Facebook. Were people even aware of the current issues with Facebook, and did they still like Facebook as a platform? And we looked at both talked to media, members of the earned media, as well as consumers themselves. There's been a tremendous amount of interest in this topic, which is why we're presenting it again. We are actually running, because the topic remains top of mind for a lot of people. So we are running additional advanced analytics. In the couple of weeks since we presented it the first time. This is just the beginning of this conversation. So, if you have questions after this, we'd be happy to follow up, and we'll continue to update you all on additional findings that we have. So before I turn it over to my esteemed colleagues who are going to take us through the presentation, just a little 1-minute blurb about who we are at Lippy Taylor. We're a 30-year-old independent creative communications agency. We were founded by Maureen Lippy, who is a former health editor and contributor to broadcast TV. And that really, sort of started our heritage as being what we call the agency that earns it. It's our epitaph, it's our swear, it's what we stand by. But beyond our sort of roots in earned media, we really have evolved to be leaders in, research and analytics and social and digital and in integrated marketing. We have, because of our independence, we have a wide range of clients. We're not one size fits all. We work with both Fortune 500 and startup brands alike. As you'll hear from our team today, we really do believe we pride ourselves in being experts in both consumer and generational trends, as you'll see some of that today. It's not just us saying it, the industry has recognized our work as well. So next slide. There I am. These are the people you'll be hearing from today, and I'd like everybody to do their own introductions.
Yeah, I'm Kevin Regan-Reichman. I'm also based out of the Minneapolis Lippy Taylor office with Emily, which is actually just means this room with my dog in the background because it's 2020. I'm a VP of digital at the agency. I'm a journalist by trade, but I was a print journalist, not a broadcast journalist. So this whole year of being on camera makes me wish I had done better in those classes, but really have an understanding of earned media, and have spent my entire career in digital and social strategy, and I'm a numbers nerd at heart. So presentations like this are really what I live for. So we'll talk through the research and really looking through the lens of how consumers and members of the media are viewing Facebook with all of the news about the boycott this year.
Kate Charles. I'm the Chief Planning Officer here at Lippy Taylor. And my background's been in consumer consulting or research in some way, shape or the other in the last decade or so, have been really focused on fast data and understanding consumer data as it happens, as it happens in real time, and what, more importantly, marketers can learn from it and how to evolve and change some of their planning.
Great.
And now everybody knows that I asked Kate to put her camera on. Sorry about the reply all.
Yeah, it's funny too, because like this photo is definitely pre-COVID, and I'm like, oh, that's what I used to look like. Cool, that's great. we've all been having some hard times.
Amazing.
And I'm Jeremy Simon. I run our influencer marketing team here. I've spent the last 15 years in the social digital influencer space, so this is a topic near and dear to me, and we're going to start to kick it off right now. So before we go into kind of that marketing and consumer landscape, we really wanted to look at the context of where we are right now and why this is important. So when we look at society as a whole, we've really dipped into this a state of distrust and isolation. So if we compare numbers from March 2018 and March 2020, we really look at isolation, distrust, a lack of comfort, and kind of also kind of that vulnerability coming up with with consumers. And what that means though for Facebook is we've seen the reason that consumers use Facebook to cure their isolation. So when we start to look at what are some of the ways that you're using Facebook, we look at connecting with friends and family, likes and comments on posts, just passing the time. So it's important to know that the main reason people are on Facebook really is to cure that isolation, but we also know that they are receiving information and staying informed as well. And why that's important is, do they still trust information coming from Facebook? And if we look at the question of which of the following companies would you be proud to work for, we see a significant dip in Facebook, kind of as we look towards that June 2020 line. So while as everyone else has kind of remained fairly constant, we've certainly seen a dip in Facebook.
Jeremy, can I add one thing to that slide? So since we originally put this together, we looked into this a little bit closer, and we started to tease apart these groups and some of the correlations, which we can send out, just ping us if you're interested in seeing some of the advanced analytics we're working on. But we're running correlations to all of the brand perceptions in YouGov by these platforms and different relationships that whether they're current users or audiences of Facebook and lapsed. And we're seeing some, and then also cutting it by the different time periods of pre-COVID, COVID, and post or kind of boycott post. And it's really interesting because we're seeing that there was a bit of a lull pre-COVID where people were sort of neutral across all groups. And then as soon as the pandemic started, everything became really relevant again. And even the lapsed users started to use Facebook more, and we saw this across all platforms. And then there's a stark change in lapsed users and current users after the boycott, and we didn't see those in the other platforms. So we can send through some of that information. We're literally gathering it and analyzing it now, that the data is starting to be large enough. But it's really interesting to see how the kind of subtle behavioral signals they're giving us are starting to come through as well.
Great. And so looking at a brief history kind of that summer 2020 version of Facebook scandals, it started with really Mark Zuckerberg being firm in his decision to allow some controversial posts on Facebook from Trump. That was followed by watchdog mulling, Facebook ad boycott over Zuckerberg's inaction. And then ultimately, when there was a chance to meet about hate speech, Facebook was really accused of, just a lot of spin here. And so as brand marketers, there was really three options then. So it was boycott, reduce spend without officially being part of the boycott, or stay on the sidelines. And throughout the time period when brands had to really make that decision, it was something where there was a lot of kind of consultation going on. It wasn't an easy decision for some brands. I think that there was a lot of levers being pulled, but ultimately everyone had to make some decision. And some brands were a lot more clear about the rationale for their decision. So looking at a quote from Conagra Brands, for example, "We stand by our company values, including broad-mindedness and integrity, and believe there is no place for hate, intolerance, and racism in the world or on social media. That's why Conagra Brands is pausing all paid Facebook and Instagram advertising in the US across our brand portfolio throughout the rest of the calendar year." So this is an example of, whereas a lot of brands committed to July, this was a very clear statement about looking at, throughout the rest of the year. But when we look at the numbers, there are 9 million Facebook advertisers, and at the end, 1,100 advertisers officially boycotted Facebook during this time. So we're really looking at a very small percentage here. And we also see, stop hate for profit. We know that there's a call for needing more change. So really at the root of it all, there was an action for what it is that we were trying to, or what was trying to be achieved through the boycott. So there was a clear, kind of line, and what you'll see later is, did that really resonate, with consumers though? And we also see now, some brands are starting to return. So some of the early brands that really started the boycott, North Face, for example, we were encouraged by the initial progress and recognize that change doesn't happen overnight. So that's an example of a brand that, is ready to return to the Facebook platform. And ultimately, what you'll see throughout from media, consumer, and kind of overall point of view is, did it matter? So looking at estimated spending on Facebook from the top 100 advertisers, we see a relatively small impact from the boycotters. We do see some from the kind of people who had reduced spend, but really those other top advertisers really did keep Facebook afloat. And what that translates to, if you move to the next, is Facebook reported a 10% ad growth and says that it really saw a similar spike during the boycott as well. So when they were delivering their second quarter results, they showed a lot of advertising strength despite COVID and protests, and really, they anticipate that to carry on through the rest of the year as well. And a big reason for that is because while Fortune 500 companies, whether it was Adidas, Unilever, Verizon, they were able to reduce spend, kind of protect their reputation. So committing to the boycott to an extent, the DTC and small businesses, whether it's Quip or FabFitFun, they really rely on Facebook for their bottom line. DTC has found a home, in social ads, and so really boycotting that would completely, impact their bottom line. And it really has been, the center of our world as practitioners. So as people that are, counseling clients a lot on this, we looked at, Facebook, while Facebook's bottom line seems to be fine, we want to look at Facebook's reputation. So we want to turn to consumers and media to really understand their perceptions here. So we took a survey of over 1,000 consumers. We looked at survey and conversations with 26 members of the media. And then we also performed social conversation analytics as well. And what we saw is that, the boycott conversation really peaked in June and tapered during the actual boycott. So we saw 437,000 mentions of Stop Hate for Profit boycott. That really spiked in June 19th and then tapered before the boycott began. So one of the things we saw here is there was a lot of talk about, leading up to it and whether brands would do it or not, as well as brands that were getting the message out there that they were participating in the boycott. But once it actually happened, we saw media taper off significantly. I'm going to turn it over to Kate.
Yeah, thank you. So, one of the things that's really interesting, and I'm fascinated by this topic from kind of a macro view, and then also from a consumer, just a personal perspective as well. But one thing that as we were starting to craft this story, we had to think about, are we living, we talk all the time about, are we living in our own bubbles for when we're marketing and when we're thinking of the consumer? And so a really core question we had to ask ourselves are we living in our own media bubble as marketers? Is it just us that's really having our antenna up to this? So we wanted to look a little bit and talk to some of the media specifically as another input to all of this analysis. So we know from our own worlds that the media has put a lot of emphasis on the boycott, and the media is specifically attuned to this, and they're very aware, and they have a lot of opinions. On the next slide, it makes sense because when you think about, they're almost competitors, right? I mean, when you really look at it as a share of dollar, a lot of these digital platforms are coming in and taking away from some of the standard news platforms or other media outlets. So, I mean, in many ways, they're, you know, it's a natural sort of competition that keeps everything moving and sharp. But it's also, on the next slide, you know, that also explains where some of this distrust could come from. The fact that they are at odds with each other in the sense that they're competitors. But it also, you know, begs the question, well, are they just more aware of how Facebook works and the formula behind it and the way that Facebook gets that data? So, you know, I wanted to just at least showcase this as an input and know that we're thinking about this is clearly a group that's very informed. The media is very informed when it comes to it, also has its own opinions. But I think it's important for us to analyze this and look at this. But we did notice when comparing the media to the consumers, media being the orange bars and consumers being the blue bars, that overall the media was much more passionate about how they feel about trust and about the data privacy. So we, like I mentioned, we want to think more about this and figure out, is this just a time thing? So as consumers become more aware, will they get to the same level that the media is already at, or the media is just processing this quicker? Or is it our own bias and, you know, we're just a little bit more aware, so we have more sensitivity? Time will tell as we start to unpack that. But as I mentioned earlier, we are starting to see the consumer usage and the correlations with perceptions of the platform not jumping back after they initially from the COVID push initially. So it'll be interesting over time to see how this continues to play out. So the next thing, oh yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Kevin.
Sorry, Kate. I was going to say, as Kate mentioned, we're going to say the same sentence at the same time, maybe. What we wanted to do was make sure we were zooming out from our world as marketers and our relationships with the people in the world of earned media and really understand, what do consumers think? I know we've all been in this business long enough to where we've seen Facebook and other social platforms go through their ups and downs. I will say I've called it wrong in the past, and I thought, well, this will entirely shift consumer behavior. Nobody will stand for a data breach. And then a month later, I realized, well, no, we're all just talking about the data breach on Facebook itself. So wanted to go right to the source and understand what are consumers actually saying about the boycott and everything else surrounding Facebook right now. So what we did was survey 1,000 US consumers. You can see some of the demographic splits here. I think key for today's discussion is we did want to make sure that 100% of them were accessing Facebook at least weekly, and then a majority of them were accessing Facebook daily. So we're really looking at power users, although in this day and age, especially during COVID, we're all kind of power users because usage is going up across every social platform. So really what we set out to learn was, are consumers aware of the boycott? Has their perception changed? Has their perception of Facebook changed? Do they trust Facebook? And will the boycott affect their spending habits? Obviously, as brand marketers, at the end of the day, we want to know if being part of the boycott or not being part of the boycott is going to affect their purchase decisions, because that informs how we want to show up to them on the channel. So we really know that Facebook and Instagram are central to our quarantine experience. So we joke that some people are taking this time to learn a new life skill or to make the world better. But most of us are just staring at our phones more and more and more and doom scrolling because that's easier the longer the quarantine goes on. But wanted to understand, what are they doing when they're on the platform? So some of this is familiar. We know that they're going to both channels to connect with their friends and family. You can see a couple interesting differences here, like Instagram pops more when they're trying to discover new products or want to support a social cause. And then Facebook outperforms when they're looking to do things like stay informed and catch up on the news. But across the board, people are spending more time on both channels. We did ask them about their concerns about Facebook. So things like, which of the following topics is concerning to you when it comes to Facebook specifically? And the topics that popped were monitoring hate speech, personal data privacy is still big in there, even though Cambridge Analytica itself is much lower. And then Black Lives Matter. So lots of concerns across the board, with some of them really popping. And then we also know that Facebook is seen as a much more negative place than Instagram. So we did a polar analysis and found that consumers experience 10 times greater negativity when they're on Facebook than on Instagram. we started to poke at this because we wanted to understand if a brand was part of the Facebook boycott but continued business as usual on Instagram, would that matter to consumers? Or from their point of view, are they really thinking of those channels as separate entities entirely and separate user experiences? I don't think anybody will be completely shocked to see that Facebook is where more of the negativity lives. It's a more natural user behavior there to, unfortunately, fight with your friends and family and post news of all sorts of quality, whereas Instagram is where we go to curate our perfect lives and not debate political topics quite as much. But we also think that some of that could be because consumers don't even realize that Facebook owns Instagram. So 44% of the respondents said that Facebook and Instagram are similar but entirely separate social media sites. 40% of them did actually know that Facebook owns Instagram. And then a few people either thought that Instagram owned Facebook or that there was no relationship between them whatsoever. So again, just helping us see in our world as marketers and paying attention to these platforms every day, some of this seems like common sense or old news to us, but remembering that from that consumer's point of view, they are there for that user experience and to connect with their friends and family. And a lot of them are not concerned or even aware of the business relationship between the two entities. So despite all that, we did see that roughly half of the people we surveyed still trust Facebook and their advertisers. So we asked questions like, which of the following describes how you feel about the trustworthiness of Facebook as a company and its business practices? And as you can see, a pretty even split, but some consumers saying, I always trust Facebook as a company, hands down, or I usually trust Facebook as a company. And a similar split when we said, which of the following describes how you feel about the brands that advertise frequently on Facebook, with 5% saying I always trust, and then 46% saying I usually trust the brands that advertise on Facebook. So we did think that was interesting, even though the consumers know about or they have concerns about Facebook as a platform, they still feel good about what they're going to do as a company, and they still feel good about the brands that they're seeing pop up in their feed. And consumers also think that Facebook will do the right thing as a company. So 16% of consumers strongly disagree that Facebook would do the right thing. An interesting juxtaposition with the members of the media that we spoke to, 57% of them strongly disagree that Facebook's going to do the right thing as a company. So getting back to Kate's earlier point, we are seeing media, leading public opinion, informing public opinion, but also being much more informed about the business practices and the news than general consumers are.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we wanted to start with a broader look and what Kevin just took through of overall, what's the level of awareness, what's going on with people's perceptions of Facebook. And then this section, we're going to focus specifically on the boycott itself and where people are aware of it, how much they know about it, and if it's starting to change their perception. So looking just at the people who are familiar with it, we found a pretty mixed bag. It was polarizing, as many of the things are right now in our world. So on the left-hand side, we have these pretty passionate groups of people who are saying, I feel good that brands are standing up for something or choosing to boycott the platform. I appreciate that they're taking this position. All hate should be banned. I'm supporting these brands, really advocates for the brands taking these actions. In the middle, it's sort of the indifference or feeling that it's almost inappropriate, that it's not their place to people shouldn't use Facebook as a tool for a political tool. It doesn't bother me. Or in some ways, hey, yeah, I think they should be, but it's not enough. You need to be taking it even further. So it's not against it, but it's also saying that I need more from brands to stand up for the purpose that they are setting out there. And then on the far right column is really just, this isn't absurd. This isn't the type of platform that should be used to benefit the cause, or it's not their job. It's just not the place of a platform. They're a neutral party. So, we see a little bit of everything in terms of the initial consumer response, and that makes sense because this is all new. This is all new to all of us. And you could go ahead. And it's something that we're all learning as we go along with this. What surprised us is that boycotts, we were asking specific boycott, and it was much lower than we thought. Only 29% of respondents were aware of the Facebook boycott. So around 74% of 18 to 34-year-olds were not aware or not sure about it. That surprised us a little bit. And on the next slide, what we saw that surprised us even more is that among the people who did know, less than half really knew what it was about, and that it was to get kind of pressure Facebook to monitor hate speech. So as you started to get down to the core factor that was at play, you realized that it very quickly became a smaller and smaller group of those who actually among the general population were aware. What's interesting though is among the people who knew what it was and knew, were aware of the boycott and knew that it was to monitor hate, they were more likely to buy those brands who are boycotting it. So they're very in support of the ban. So the more that you know about it, the support the brands that are doing that. It's a little bit of self-fulfilling prophecy in that way, that you're likely to potentially follow these brands, and then it sort of works its way through. So, a little bit surprised to us of the fact that it wasn't quite as common knowledge as we thought, but it was interesting to see as it worked through that flow that people became more passionate about it. We thought about, okay, well, who are these groups? Who is this the 33% people who are more likely to buy these brands? But we surely thought it was going to be the younger audiences, the Gen Z millennial groups, but it actually was a broad range, and it was the 35 to 44 group that was most likely, but really it was across the range. So that surprised us as well, especially on the next slide when you see that 70% of consumers want to know that the brands they support are doing things to address social and environmental causes. And 46% pay close attention to a brand's social responsibility efforts. So this was a bit of a juxtaposition for us when we thought, that people, once they knew about this, would become really passionate about it. And we did, but it wasn't cutting through. People weren't as aware as we thought. What is another layer to add on to this is that when they are aware of the boycott, though, they do expect brands to follow through. So, this really landed with us because, over half of the people expected the brand to continue to go to boycott, not go back at all. And so once you put a stake in the ground, it's really important to consumers to see you continue that through. And as you'll recall from the previous quote slide, people felt that just boycotting Facebook, while it might be a good effort, wasn't enough for a brand to really stand for something. And this is in line with those quotes, that people are saying, okay, if you're going to do it, go full on and do it properly. And I think that's a message we hear from a lot of people, that if you're going to go somewhere, you have to be consistent with it. So the big takeaways here, one, Facebook's bottom line, partly because of those increased usage numbers that we all see from the pandemic, the fact that a lot of lapsed users came back, the fact that a lot of brands really rely on Facebook for their D2C and their conversion. Facebook's doing just fine as an overall platform. Could they have been doing better without this? Sure, we could hypothesize a lot about that, but they're not taking a huge hit from this. Consumers are, once they know about it, they do, as we saw, tend to have strong opinions about it and start to feel that it's something that is important to them and that they do want to stand behind those brands. That being said, it didn't reach this news, and this kind of splash didn't hit as many people as we thought outside of the media community. So we didn't see as big of an impact as we would have hypothesized. The role of the media, certainly plays a big part in this in terms of our own perceptions, but also like, what are they projecting out? And is their own bias, or is that because they're more informed, or a combination of the two? And then lastly, of the brands that have boycotted, we're seeing a lot of goodwill from the media and also from the consumers that were aware of it. And a chance to really reevaluate their comprehensive approaches to social and not being so kind of one-trick pony with the Facebook platform. So overall, there's a lot going on here. There's so much happening in the news cycle in the world that it's we think it's just one of those things that when people know about it, it's really landing, and it's something that they're holding on to, but it's also, you know, a little bit more fleeting than we would have thought because of all of the different distractions and the concerns happening around the world right now, and especially in the US. So that's the overall big picture summary. And last time we did this, we had some really good questions from the participants that, you know, we wanted to open it up to you. There's a lot of different ways we can cut this data and look at this data. And like I said, a lot more analysis that we're doing as we get more data to understand the overall long-term effect. And if we are seeing people start to duck out of their usage. So we'll continue to keep you updated. But if you want to ping any questions that you have, we can look into answering some of those.
I invite you guys, please, any participants, feel free to actually submit in the Q&A tab that is at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And that in theory should alert us that we have a question from the floor. Playing my MC role here. One of the questions that got asked last time, which we thought was kind of interesting, is this: what does this sort of say about the role, how aware is media to some of these things versus consumers that are sort of putting their head in the sand? And does that matter? Do we care? So I'm not sure, Kate or Kevin or Jeremy, if you guys want to.
I mean, I take great comfort in knowing that the media is more informed than general consumers. That would be, you know, a downfall of society if they weren't. But so it was good to see that, like, even if they're not covering social or digital or marketing, we talked to members of the media across multiple outlets. It was good to see that they're on top of it. And I think that should always be the case, is that media is going to know more about communication channels like this and what's in the news than general consumers. I was surprised to see just that you know, such a stark drop off, though, than when we did talk to the consumers and see who was aware of the boycott at all, and just see how low those numbers were.
Yeah, and I think
cool.
another element there, Emily, is that there's what you want to do and then what you're actually going to be able to do, right? Like, I think we talk about that cognitive dissonance a lot from I think, honestly, from a media perspective and a consumer perspective. I might have a lot of frustration and annoyance with a platform like Facebook, but right now it's one of the best ways for me to communicate with family and friends, and it's just become such a ubiquitous part of my life that it's hard for me to completely cut it out. And I think it's just such a bizarre, I mean, I think that's true for the media professionals as well. So I think it's just a really complicated space, and something that I'm personally going to rely a lot on, not as much claimed data, but actual behavioral data as we get more of it and we start to see some of the usage and the revenue and the overall sentiment. I think it'll be really fascinating to see how that plays out as we can start to see some of the big trends and not just some of the fields.
And that's actually a little bit of a follow-up. If you could make a prediction about what some of this sort of advanced analytics is going to come back with, and what you're going to see, how the trends are evolving, what would your crystal ball say, Kate?
Well, I think people are going to say that they're not using it much, and they're going to say that they don't like it as much, and I think that's all going to be accurate. But I think there's a certain element of until there's something else to replace that, whether it's being able to be out in our daily lives again, or we're going to have, another sort of element to fill the void, that I think that people will still use it more than they realize.
Okay, we have a question. A site called Good Must Grow shows a significant uptick in conscious consumer spending overall. Do you think that Facebook and its advertisers are immune to this?
I think, well, if I understand the question, you're saying that, are you saying, I'm wondering if you're asking if it's mutually exclusive. So because I would argue that conscious consumer spending, a brand that's a very capitalist, conscious capitalist, could still technically market on Facebook. And so I think the question is, is someone who does that on Facebook automatically not seen as consciously capitalistic? Is that what, I'm not doing a very good job of answering that, but I think overall, I think consumers think about the brand themselves on Facebook when it comes to that conscious spending. I don't think people necessarily associate Facebook with the, the brand. Facebook, the platform, and Facebook, the brand, I think are seen as two different things. So the platform has become a daily routine in our lives, and it's the way that we engage with people. It's the way that we're able to discover new things. We get targeted for really hyper relevant pieces of content and products. But I think Facebook, the brand, has seen a lot of negativity. And that is where I think a lot of that negative energy goes. But I think people are still using the platform and would not necessarily associate it with being unconscious or.
Yeah, put another way, are people going to reward those who are, advertising or pulling out, right? Maybe that's also part of it, which is, I don't know if that's, you found that there's an awareness of it, and there's probably a small segment of consumers that really, really, really do care and will vote with their pocketbooks when it comes to who's advertising on Facebook and who's not. But will that continue to evolve and grow, that smaller percentage of the population?
I think it will, unless Facebook changes some of its policies, which it has. It has been making more of a stake in the ground and making more of an effort. So I think if they continue to evolve, then I think they can absolutely make up some of the ground that they lost, because it's become such an important part of day-to-day life these days. Yeah, it'll be interesting.
I also think when we talk about specifically like the conscious consumer, there, a lot of the brands that are reaching them, especially if they're more niche, like Facebook's platform is really one of the only options for a small business. And what we are seeing though is that there are more companies, whether it's TikTok or Hulu, that are starting to enter that small business self-serve platform space. Or companies that enter the self-serve space, the more you're making a choice to use Facebook versus it's just a necessity to survive.
Yeah, that's a good call. There have not been many platforms that have really welcomed those, sort of those smaller or more niche brands in the same way that Facebook did early on. Yeah, it's a good point.
I think there's always going to be that irony of when we make socially responsible decisions, or we support local, or we support whatever causes we stand for, we still want to go get the social cred and ego boost by telling everybody on Facebook that we made a smart choice, and we're not going to tell them about all the other things that we just bought through a Facebook ad or an Amazon ad.
Yeah, and last point here, I think, especially for some of those D2C brands, Instagram has a huge role in that hyper targeting and reaching a lot of younger consumers. And like we saw, people don't really know the full story that Facebook owns Instagram. So I think that there's also, either as time goes on and people become more informed about that, or more opportunities present themselves, I think it'll continue to be a tool for small businesses and D2C brands to, whether they're conscious or not, to use that.
Okay. We're starting to see a little bit of drop off. We're hitting the 45-minute mark. We might be able to just sort of say, you guys are going to have a few found minutes in your day if we don't go the whole hour. Just kind of moving on to and if there are any follow-up questions, please feel free to, reply to the invite email. There's the email address in there about what we might follow up with individually. So what does this all mean for brands? That's what we care about. You know, at the end of the day, the brands that boycotted, right, they did get a lot of goodwill with the media. And it definitely demonstrated a willingness to act based on principles and profit. It was interesting because brands, you know, unlike perhaps other issues in the past, in recent memory, that in this case, brands were able to take a stand without risking their business value. So that, I think, is gratifying for a lot of those brands that did say we're going to take a stand and not just be neutral or put our head in the sand. It was interesting, I think, for a lot of brands as well, that what would happen if they stopped advertising on Facebook? Would sales drop off? Would they find that people were mad about it or happy about it? And it has led to some serious media mix conversations, for sure. It is on the consciousness now of where does Facebook or Instagram fit in the marketing mix, and do we share the same values versus other platforms, which is probably great news for, you know, the rest of the news media, the rest of the advertising world, that, oh my gosh, maybe it'll come back to print magazines again. But in addition, I think there's some, you know, the idea that it is, you know, advertisers, it's not just sort of, you know, it's content as much as it is, you know, advertising. And social remains an area that is here to stay. And, you know, the usage will likely continue to rise. There's also very much a risk for advertisers that your content will show up against negative content. So again, content is king, content is queen, right? Use that to tell your story across platforms, whether social or not, and it becomes less reliant on the actual platform and the channel and more about the quality of the content. I think we believe that balancing, again, sort of getting back to the media mix, balancing those own channels where you don't have to rely on, you know, platforms that you're not entirely comfortable with, take advantage of those own channels and boost them and put them out into the world, along with shared channels and, of course, earned media, providing that third-party credibility. You know, so tone and voice of the actual content is the most important thing, we believe, for marketers moving forward, because we're having less and less control about where that content will actually show up. You know, there's a few key things here, and we'd be happy to follow up if people want to know more about, you know, how do you sort of safeguard, you know, the brand uncertainty and marketer uncertainty with Facebook moving forward. For sure, social listening, you know, amp that up. Make sure that you understand what your consumers or your audiences are talking about, and as it relates to Facebook, as it relates to other platforms, as it relates to, you know, controversial topics or newsworthy topics out in the world. Making sure, back to this idea of the tone and voice, that's really key, so that you can distance yourself even if you're alongside of something. You're distinctly your own brand or your own voice. Understanding your channel strategies, have a real strategic approach to what channels are going to be communicating what content to whom. And then back to this idea of you know, especially own channels, making sure you are, or influencer channels, that you have enough money reserved and a strategic approach to how you amplify that, and to continue to, you know, be less reliant on the algorithms and more reliant on what you can control. So that's our ending slide, all in red. We are very thankful that so many of you joined today. If you do want a copy of this presentation or to follow up with us, you know, our Chief Client Officer, who's not on the call, but we're going to put her email out there, so feel free to spam her. Lori Rubinson, lrubinson@lippytaylor.com. Again, any additional questions, please do follow up with us. We thank you so much for carving out some time this late August Wednesday afternoon, and look forward to being in touch.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.